Fancy pants. Fancy pants.
Oh, fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Ah, fancy pants.
Such fancy pants.
Gotta put on your fancy pants tonight. Going down to the city where the lights are bright with my disco balls and my LED light. Gotta put on my fancy pants tonight. Maybe you got a hat, maybe you got a tie, maybe you got a feather too. Oh, maybe you got gold chains. Oh, last night's red wine stain, but all that bling doesn't even have a clue. Oh, for if you're feeling down, you gotta go out on the town. You know what time it is, it's true.
Time for fancy pants.
And if you're feeling blue, only one thing you can do. You know what time it is. Oh,
Time for fancy pants.
one thing that you can do, one thing you know is true. Gotta put on your fancy pants tonight. Fancy pants.
Right, this is your man Umar Lee, the STL Stranger, down here on lovely Cherokee Street in South St. Louis. I tell you what, a lot of people come down here on Cherokee Street. They come for the Mexican food, they come for the bars, they come for many different things, but my favorite place to get something to eat is the Palm Trees. Get some lovely Arabic food down here, some Arabic coffee, Turkish coffee, shawarma platters, the founders of this restaurant from Saudi Arabia, and the food of the Khalij, of the Gulf, is something that you cannot get a lot here in the Midwest, and we're really fortunate to have this place. Before I introduce my guest, Mitch Eagles, today, which is like a stage name.
Yeah.
I just want to give a little history on Saudi Arabia and St. Louis. They used to have a Saudi clubhouse, and the Meshed Zaytuna in West St. Louis County in Creve Coeur. And as a teenager, I used to hang out with the Saudis a lot in my early 20s at the Town and Ford apartment complex in Creve Coeur, which they had made the Saudi clubhouse, and Meshed Zaytuna, which was a Saudi mosque. That's a little St. Louis Saudi history they got rid of in the late 90s, early 2000s. So Mitch, I primarily got to know you through your advocacy of public transit on social media. You're known for that. Bigly, as Trump would say. Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah. And before we do that, we'll get a little bit of your background.
Sure.
So, are you a St. Louis native?
I'm not. I'm from Iowa originally.
Mine. So, Hawkeyes or Cyclones fan?
I've never really chose a side. I wasn't huge in it, but my grandfather went to U of I, so Hawkeyes, I guess.
So people know I'm a big college wrestling guy and a big wrestling guy. And of course, Iowa's famous for wrestling. So I think of that in the Iowa caucus, which makes it famous every 4 years. Great history there at Corver Hawkeye Arena. Best attendance in all college wrestling, which is very important. Mizzou is one of the top 2 in the country, and you know, I don't even want to give the attendance numbers; they're so bad.
Yeah.
What brought you here to St. Louis?
So I went to WashU and have basically remained here since I graduated from there.
What did you study there at WashU?
Physics.
Physics. STEM guy.
To some extent, I got a mind for math, sort of, but I spent most of my time there in the theater department.
So you were goofing off doing theater.
Yeah, basically. Family didn't love that part. Spend the time there.
Were you there when Stern's daughter was there?
I don't know. Stern's.
Howard Stern, his daughter.
I didn't even know his daughter went there.
Yeah, she did theater too. So yeah.
I wouldn't say that I met her, but maybe she never identified as such.
Yeah, she looks just like him, so you probably
okay.
Probably was there. So interesting factoid. So what you say you like St. Louis? What grabbed you? Because I call WashU a ghetto because you have. I mean, I love WashU because it adds a lot to the community. So I'm not going to knock that at all. And I've benefited personally from WashU tremendously, but I call it a ghetto because I know many students who spend 4 years there, 5 years, 6 years, and they know virtually nothing about St. Louis.
Yeah.
Percentage-wise, few of them stay. So what made you break the mold and decide to stay in St. Louis?
Yeah, well, I'd say, first of all, that was very much my experience for most of my time at WashU was rarely leaving campus. I mean, when we did, we went to the Loop, was the furthest. And sort of in my senior year, I started to break out of that mold. And being from Iowa, which is not much of a city at all.
It's a rural state.
Yeah, it's a very rural state. Even Des Moines, which is the largest city, is not much of a city. I've always kind of been a fan of them. I visited New York when I was a kid and started getting out into St. Louis and really experiencing the density, experiencing it through transit, experiencing it, just seeing all sorts of people in close proximity with each other. That's what I just love. Just love being around people. I love seeing people and seeing families. And I probably could have ended up in any city, but St. Louis speaks to me in a lot of ways. Brick buildings, I'm a huge fan of, and it's hard to find any better place for that.
So, you eventually moved down here to South St. Louis, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And how long you been down here?
About 4 years now, 5 years now.
Now, how did your journey to public transit advocacy begin? Like, how did that start?
Yeah, so I've never been a fan of driving, personally. Mm-hmm. I know you are, and
I'm utilitarian.
Yes, okay. And so when I first started after college, my job, I worked from home, and so I didn't have to drive. And then eventually they moved here, and now I work downtown, and I lived in the Bolivar Place originally, which is very near the Metrolink, so I would just commute on that. And so the combination of kind of utilizing that and hating driving, that's sort of, I just started relying on it, and I drove less and less, and I found that I could pretty much get around to most of the places I wanted just on the bus and on transit. And then when I did move to South City, that's when sort of I started using the bus more often, and learning the bus routes in the city, sort of actually having a map in my mind of like where I could go and when I needed to get on the bus and stuff like that. It was a sort of an actual usable mode in my mind then.
So let me give you my spiel on public transit.
Please.
So I grew up taking public transit, the buses, and even as an adult, a lot of times just not having a car, not wanting to take public transit, being on public transit. And I grew up on the stories, particularly my grandmother talking about catching streetcars in St. Louis, and she lamented the removal of the streetcars, and it was something I thought about. Man, I wish I would have lived in the time of the streetcars. When I moved to New York City, I didn't have a car in New York.
Yeah.
I used to work as a professional driver, but I never had a personal car. But what I found there, people say no one in New York drives has a car.
Right.
That's not really true. People have cars. That's why there's traffic jams all the time. That's why you can't park. Particularly more working class people.
Right.
Because the more blue collar you are, the further you had to live from your job.
Yeah.
Or the further you had to move from the transit hubs to be able to afford a place to live.
Yeah.
And then I moved down to the DC area where you had kind of similar dynamics, more of a car culture, but similar dynamics because there's a lot of transit. Definitely a younger, more affluent crowd were less likely to own vehicles, right? And the very poor, obviously, because they couldn't afford it. So for me, when I think of catching the bus in St. Louis, I got memories of like taking 2 or 3 hours to get to work each way. Thinking to myself, man, I could like drive to Columbia, Missouri in the time it takes me to get to work. Or opening up the old St. Louis Post-Dispatch classified section and saying must have a car.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a car, you can't even apply to a job. Or not being able to take the second shift because you won't have a way home. And of course the massive transit needs in like North County, you can't get to the jobs in Earth City or, you know what I'm saying? So I have a shared sentiment with you in that I like public transit. And I agree we need to invest in our public transit in St. Louis. But I know if we go to the Metrolink station now, if we go to the bus stop and we ask somebody, hey, I got keys to a car.
Yeah.
Would you like the car or would you just like to hop on the bus? I mean, a 9 out of 10 is going to take the car.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't blame them at all. That's exactly the case here. Thank you. So growing up in sort of suburbia of Iowa, right, I hated having to get in a car to go 5 minutes away to something that would be walkable or transitable if that system existed. Right. And we do see that here, right? The system is way over under-resourced and overworked for people to like actually be able to utilize it in a way that's easy. Transit shouldn't be a hard thing. It shouldn't take two hours to get somewhere. And unfortunately, that's often the case. Working downtown is easy because all the buses go downtown and emanate out from there. But other than that, it's very hard.
Right. And there's a perception, and I don't agree with this perception, but it's out there. I mean, look, we're in St. Louis. So I tell people anything can happen at any time. I mean, we could get murdered walking out of this door right now. I mean, that's St. Louis.
Yep.
Anyone under any other reality is delusional. But I don't think Metrolink is any more dangerous than anything else in St. Louis. I think it's statistically pretty much not dangerous.
I've seen the statistic that it's as dangerous as Wildwood. So.
Right. I mean, probably a lot of underreported stuff. So I mean, but it's not that dangerous. Yep. So how do you deal with this perception that transit is dangerous, or Metrolink is dangerous, that a lot of people have?
I think that most people who do use transit realize, how safe it really is, relatively. Again, it's St. Louis. We're not the safest city in the world. But the people who kind of harp on that as a reason not to use it, or something that any article on the Post-Dispatch you see about transit,
they go crazy.
They go wild. I'll never write that.
Get your CCW. They're never going to write it anyway.
Right, exactly. Yeah. They were never part of that crowd, and they just want to vent about other things that they basically hate about St. Louis, and that's a chance for them too. So the perception certainly exists with some of my friends, and my goal has been trying to get these people on for the first time, because after you ride it, transit the first time, you kind of have an experience of what it's like.
Right.
You're gonna feel a little more. That was the first time I rode the bus. I didn't for a long time as a student, because my fear was that I would get on and I would just be bad at putting the fare in and hold everybody up, and everyone would think I was stupid or whatever. And after I had done it the first time, that's not a fear anymore. And I think
sound like sex. You had to do it.
Right, exactly. The first time's always the hardest at anything.
Eventually you get good at it.
Right.
You start, riding it. And whilst you were, did you have any kind of warnings, like don't go here? I know people were told don't go, don't go past Kingslands. Did you ever get any of those messages?
No, I mean, there was sort of always the Delmar Divide was like the big one that people would talk about. I did hear some you don't get on the Metrolink. That's dangerous. But
sketch.
That's an often used word.
Yeah, that's next level European American. Sketch.
Sketch.
Yeah. But you overcame those things and found your home down here in South St. Louis.
Yeah, definitely. And coming from a background of a very sort of sheltered Iowan lifestyle, I wouldn't say that was I just immediately jumped into it, or that
You say sheltered Iowa, like you're homeschooled or something like that?
No, just Iowa being a very white, very suburban, very not a lot going on, conservative state. That St. Louis is a big shift from that.
Yeah. Even though much of Missouri is pretty indistinguishable from Iowa culture, like northern Missouri.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we see this debate, myself, that when it comes to improving transit, there's always this kind of discussion of priorities. Do you work on bus service, or do you work on rail? Do you work on increasing transit in areas of the poor, the working class, North St. Louis County, much of St. Louis City, and North City and South Side? Or do you focus on the Central Corridor, or getting a higher clientele, a higher income clientele? That's a big debate within transit, not just in St. Louis, but nationally.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I would say, and I'd say that Metro's priority, at least from what I've seen, for a long time has kind of been trying to get that new clientele. I mean, the Metrolink runs through the Central Corridor, right? That's kind of who they've been trying to attract. But that's not how we're going to fix the problems of transit. You know, people need to get places now, today. So as for the bus versus sort of rail argument, we can put more buses on the street tomorrow if we had them, and they could serve people tomorrow. We're going to hopefully get this north-south Metrolink, right? But it's going to be, 10 years, 15 years before we have it? I say that, at least in the bus-rail debate, I lie strongly on the bus side.
Do you think there's a perception from the state of Missouri, from St. Louis County, definitely from St. Charles County? I mean, you weren't here when they talked about sending the Metrolink out to St. Charles County. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was...
I've heard a little about it.
Yeah, it was an openly racist campaign against it. There's a perception in white Missourians in St. Louis that funding public transit is just something for black people, and why should I do this? Because I'm never going to take it anyway, and my family's not going to take it. Is that a real problem you have in promotion of transit?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, a big part of it is some money, of course, funding. Right. The state puts no money towards transit.
But that's a part of it, right?
Exactly, and that's a huge part, is that, I mean, I would say it's veiled, or very thinly veiled, racism coming from Jefferson City of who benefits from transit. And they have an idea of their mind, and it's not themselves. You know, it's not white Missouri in their mind.
But how do you fight that?
I think that, I don't know that that's the fight that you need to be taking. Obviously, you should fight back against that transit will increase crime, because it doesn't. That putting more Metrolink stations in. The thing I've heard is people would steal TVs and take them on the Metrolink. Is I've heard an argument that was made, which is couches, which is ridiculous, of course. Right. So I don't think you're going to get very far with these folks again. They're going to vote on whatever comes up, and I don't know what you do about that, but you keep working on the folks who are really going to be benefited by transit, which is a lot of the city, is a lot of North County, right? A lot of South County, I think, even could benefit from expanded transit.
I mean, we're a low-income metro.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of folks could benefit from public transit.
And the problem is that without it, and with it being as bad and as kind of on the wires as... Oh, awesome. Thank you. I think it's good. With it being so bad, people who maybe can't even afford to buy a car have to, because they have to get to work. They can't rely on this system.
And that's why you have this used car lots that they... a lot of people buy a new used car. Mm-hmm. Every tax refund, they buy it in February and March, and by June they're already without a car because the car was a lemon, or they couldn't afford the new payments. Or
that's a hugely predatory system.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say gasoline as well, which is a ongoing cost for a car, right? That is money that when you pay it, it leaves the city, right?
But that was my argument that DC was more expensive than New York, because my rent was exactly the same in DC as it was in New York, but I had to have a car.
Yeah.
And then I had to pay for insurance. Mm-hmm. Then I had to pay for parking. Then I had to pay for gas. So I had a lot of...
And I don't know if they did there, but the personal property tax here is another ongoing cost for a car.
That's an Illinois temp tax as well.
Yeah, true enough. Those things will last forever.
That's right. So, how would you rate the current Mayor Cruzen and County Executive Stinger on the transit issue? If you had to grade them A through F, what would you grade them?
I mean, I'd give a strong F to both of them. Lyda Cruzen, I will say this, during her campaign, explicitly said she wanted to improve the bus system in St. Louis. I was happy to hear that. That was not an explicit thing I heard from a lot of candidates, and nothing has happened with it, of course. So I haven't seen anything. I've had friends who have gone to her after one of her town halls, went up to her and asked her specifically about transit, and she said, her answer was about how they're trying to improve the reduced fare system, or the reduced price fare system, which doesn't solve the problem of what transit is. Stenger, I don't follow the county stuff so well, but I know he's pretty opposed to Metrolink expansion out into the county.
Well, particularly South County.
Yeah.
I don't think it minds too much. Well, I don't think he would fight too hard if it went north. But I don't think the South, that's just my perception.
Yeah.
Because that's his base in South County. and Metrolink is not popular with
Right.
South County voters for a lot of the reasons we previously discussed.
Yeah.
So if you had to guess, how long do you think it would take to get North-South Metro?
So the sort of estimates I've heard is something like that it would be 10 years from now that we will see it happening. We have the money through Prop 1 accumulating right now. We would need federal matching funds. There's been a lot of kind of doubts that we'll get those. I don't see that as the case. I think we're probably just about as likely to get the federal funds as we were before. But getting those, then we have to do another study. We have to wait a couple years and get more feedback, and then I think we can start building it after that. So 10 years is what I've kind of heard.
What do you say to the urbanist argument that some are making, that you just need Uber, and that would take care of it? You don't need public transit. You've heard that, right?
Oh, I've definitely heard that. I was arguing with someone on Facebook the other day about tiny little cars that will just jot around and carry people.
Right.
This is a really common one, and I haven't been convinced that this is actually an improvement on any system at all. Right? We kind of already have microtransit in taxis, right? And they serve a purpose, but it's kind of, we haven't seen them replace transit overall, right? And then, if you could get it an autonomous vehicle that doesn't have a driver or something like that, you're still going to end up with a lot of congestion. Everybody's using these same roads in an individual vehicle.
Right.
And so I've seen a lot of
Let's say cars are obsolete. Mm-hmm. They're going to have self-driving cars. Mm-hmm. But still a car. That doesn't make
It's still a car.
obsolete. They might make driving obsolete.
Right.
That's not going to make cars obsolete. And they're still going to need a way for fuel or however they're powered. Because they're still going to have to park. Mm-hmm. It's still going to be manufactured. Mm-hmm. So I'm not seeing any discussion of elimination of cars. It's just a changing of the nature of how they operate.
And in the end, can't we take all the resources that would go towards that, right? If we made really strong, fast, frequent transit that was reliable, that you knew it would come every 5 minutes, that's going to serve more people than an autonomous vehicle that's, again, it's going to be congested. It's going to have the same problems of everybody's trying to get downtown in the morning, and all those cars are going to clog together on the highways the same way they do now.
Well, some people would say, look, the fundamental problem, you look at Dallas or Houston or those big booming growing cities, Atlanta, Phoenix, they're so spread out. And St. Louis is spread out not because it's booming, not because it's growing by population, just because it's spreading out and thinning out. They'll say, hey, how do you create a good transit system with this sprawl? That's an issue, right?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. The thing that we see that is most important is frequency in a transit system. You have to choose to use transit, right? Cars are easy enough to get, whether they're actually affordable or not, and whether that's a wise decision or not. You have to be able to say, if you have the choice, yeah, I'm going to use transit. And right now, most cities don't have a system that allows people to say, well, I can rely on this enough that I can leave my car at home today.
So in closing, I want to ask you this.
Sure.
Are you upbeat about the transit future of St. Louis, or are you pessimistic?
I'm cautiously optimistic. We see Metro Reimagined is upping a lot of core frequencies in the next couple of years in the city. I hope that builds a stronger base of people using transit or being able to, and that from that core you can kind of expand further. It's going to take some investment from the city. It's going to take some investment from the county, and it's going to take some money from the State House, I think, for this to really happen. And those two of three of those seem very unlikely right now.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Mitch Eagles.
thank you so much.
Right.
Yeah.
Fancy pants,
Fancy pants.
fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Gotta put on your fancy pants tonight. Going down to the city where the lights are bright, with my disco balls and my LED light. Gotta put on my fancy pants tonight. And with your fancy pants, they'll give you confidence. Get you out on the dance floor all night long. Whoa, they'll make you look dapper. Get a date with a flapper. Help you paint the town red all night long. Whoa, without your fancy pants, you wouldn't stand a chance. You know what time it is, it's true.
Time for fancy pants.
what time it is. Oh,
Time for fancy pants.
one thing that you can do, one thing you know is true. You gotta put on your fancy pants tonight. Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Oh, fancy pants.
Fancy pants.
Gotta put on your fancy pants tonight.